Preface. You are about to read a manifesto to fix the increasing wealth gap in the West. This is not an ideological or argumentative piece, but a step-by-step explanation based on logical reasoning and even some simple math. This is done in the hope that we can have common ground and take meaningful action together. Due to the scale of the topic, even the simplest logical deduction requires that few common understandings be laid out first, making this a 10,000 words piece, or an 1-hour-long audio. So please make yourself comfortable when reading or listening to this. Section 1, Introduction. I'd like to start by telling a tale of two nations. A few hundred years ago, China was the wealthiest country on Earth, with an economy accounting for a quarter of the world's GDP. But behind its wealthy facade hides a dark secret. 90% of the Chinese are illiterate peasants. The ruling 10% elite have made sure that no peasants are able to read or write, by making the Chinese writing too difficult and time-consuming to learn. Unlike English, or any Romanized language, Chinese characters have no connections between how it is written and how it is read. To become literate, one must memorize the writing and then the pronunciations of hundreds of characters with no discernible pattern. The purpose of the elite was to keep the peasant mass uneducated, uninformed, and unable to rise against them. Neighboring China was Japan, who had also adopted the Chinese characters, and whose economy at the time paled in comparison. The Japanese found the Chinese characters too complicated for widespread adoption. Eventually, they used strokes from the Chinese characters to create their own alphabet for writing and pronunciation. Now the Japanese would know how to write a word, if he knows how to speak it, like in English. This seemingly trivial improvement was to have huge repercussion later. When the industrialization came from the West in the 1850s, China was still that country with a 90% mass of illiterate peasants, while the Japanese have literacy rate of about 50%, comparable to the European states. Even more impressively, the Japanese quickly boosted up their literacy rate to 90% as part of its industrialization effort. China, whose writing system is too complicated for widespread adoption, was never able to modernize and was left in the dust. In those days, a common question amongst the Chinese scholar was to understand how did their country fallen so behind so suddenly? They conclude that their country must have been in decline for a while, but couldn't agree on the cause or symptoms. The problem was there was no sign of decline if we exclusively measure the GDP level, as China had been the world's leading economy until then. For me, the decline happened centuries ago, when the elite 10% decided to hold on to power at the expense of the rest. They have created a wealth gap between them and the population, and to maintain that wealth gap, they have engineered a knowledge gap by making everyone illiterate. As such, there were little possibilities for innovation, and when it comes time to industrialize, China simply do not have enough literate people to kickstart the whole process. When we describe modern America's decline, we often cite the Roman Empire's collapse, which occurred relatively quickly. But I would say that we are more comparable to that of the Chinese Empire, a slow and imperceivable death. The gap between the rich and poor is widening, not just the wealth gap, but a knowledge gap as well. But we don't see it, and we keep praising our rising GDP and stocks. Sadly, it is always the same mechanism that makes and breaks empires, whether China or Rome. Nations adhere to the principles that made them rich, but these very same principles will also undo them. I so wish that we can learn from history, so at least America can transcend and break this cycle. Since the COVID pandemic, many people realized the seriousness of the increasing wealth gap. But no one seems to have a real solution for this. People tend to focus on fixing the symptoms of this issue, such as rising crime rates, homelessness, or housing prices, but not the issue itself. For those who try to tackle wealth inequality directly, their solutions are often aimed to even out wealth distribution through policies that help the poor. This is also a non-solution, as it doesn't correct the mechanism within capitalism that always leads back to the same problem. I wrote this manifesto because I am of firm belief to have found the missing piece to end the wealth gap, and I am myself working towards this goal. It offers a unique and comprehensive take on how to fix the issue, from the standpoint of a socially conscientious person with one foot in the tech industry. Section 2. The cause of the problem. As a web developer, I spent many hours chasing bugs and fixing broken programs, and developed an appreciation of all the pieces it takes to make a simple website running. In the computer world, either you get it, or you don't. The machine does not care about how much you pray, how popular or confident you are. If you make a mistake, you get slapped with a bug all the same. At the cost of being constantly humbled, I gradually learned to consider a problem from all its angles and depth. Unfortunately, this mindset seems to be lacking when it comes to tackling the real-life issue of wealth inequality. The proposed solutions do not take into consideration the comprehensive or subsequent impact they have on the society. Just to give some examples. Solution 1. Taxing the rich at a higher rate. This solution goes against the capitalist ideology, which assumes that the rich deserve their wealth because they work harder or smarter. If you are taxing them at a higher rate, aren't you discouraging hard work and innovation? From a wider perspective, when the tax money goes to fund the social programs for the poor, some undeserving lazy people will benefit. So you are not just discouraging work, but also proportionally encouraging laziness in a way. This chips away at the competitive nature of the society. As laziness-induced poverty keeps increasing and the innovations discouraged, even more taxes will be required. By the eventuality of its flawed design, this becomes an addictive self-reinforcing cycle until all incomes from workers gets distributed to even out the wealth gap, like communism where everyone is equally poor. On a side note, the top wealth owners do not have income, but instead own assets. Unless the state forcefully takes and sell their asset, they are not taxable anyway. Solution 2. Increase the minimum wage. This pushes larger business to further automate, and smaller local business to go bankrupt due to not being able to pay the wages. As a result, unemployment increases, making the situation worse overall, while the wealth gap keeps widening. Solution 3. Free education for all. While in theory this leads to more people having skillful jobs and increased competitiveness, it does not address the fundamental mechanism by which wealth flows to the richest. Skillful or not, employees could still be exploited for profit by the higher-up. Or they can themselves become exploiters. This may be a bandage, but not the cure. On a side note, the millennials are the most educated generation ever in terms of university degrees, and yet the most at risk of unemployment compared to the previous generations. Educated and even skillful workforce are still vulnerable to replacement. Market competition and pursuit of profit has driven artificial intelligence and automation at a rate that is too fast for college education to keep up. Solution 4. Universal basic income. This relates a little to the above idea of accessible education. As I recall from the 2020 presidential candidate Andrew Yang, the idea is that the recipient can now use the extra money to move forward in life, such as attending school or change to a better job. This could be a short-term fix, but still does not solve the fundamental issue. You may have $1,000 now to attend night classes, but even your newly acquired skills are still replaceable by robots. You have delayed the eventuality, not stopped it. I kept hammering on the fact that none of the solutions above address the fundamental issue, and it is time to fully define it for the reader. First, a fully descriptive name may be the fundamental issue posed by the capitalistic mechanism. It can be viewed as an equilibrium problem. The system we have designed is trying to reach an equilibrium state that is unacceptable to us. We know that wealth begets wealth. If you have extra money, you can use your wealth to generate more wealth by putting it in stocks, which generated a return of over 13% in the past 10 years on the S&P 500. With this return compounded year after year, you will keep growing much richer compared to, say, your neighbor who must work for subsistence with zero financial growth. However, in a broader sense, your wealth is indirectly made by exploiting your neighbor to stay poor. To illustrate, he is likely generating much more revenue for the company than what he is paid for. Although this is a general business practice, it could be seen as a form of exploitation given that he is only paid enough to keep working. And if you happen to be invested in this company which keeps growing as a result of such, your wealth would be made by indirectly exploiting others. This is basically how stock markets really works to the benefit of the wealthy, by serving as their safekeep for the money made from exploitation. Even during the COVID-induced economic downturn, the stock prices are getting so bloated that they seem more like a pyramid scheme than any reflection of the economy. Despite this, both the President Trump and Biden used the rising stocks as proof that they saved the economy. Don't they know that the stock market does not include the entire economy, and that they ignored an entire segment of the population? In fact, much of its increase was possible by sacrificing a growing economical class of working poor who are not even represented in the stock market. That is, the rising stocks themselves are being fueled by the rising wealth gap, as the money from the real-life base economy of the poor is being transferred up into the stock economy of the rich. To sum up, the one with more resources can continuously acquire more resource-generating assets, at the expense of the less resourceful. This is like a game of fish eats fish, where the bigger fish grows by eating smaller ones. And what is the equilibrium to such a game? You will reach equilibrium when there is only one fish left. This is the real issue I am getting at, is that the capitalistic game we are playing is simply trying to reach its equilibrium point. Therefore, the rich keeps getting richer while the poor getting poorer. I understand the good intention behind all the proposed solutions above, but the system is not flawed, it is just doing exactly what it is designed to do. Does the game of Monopoly end when all players are satisfied with their financial situation? No. It ends when there is only one winner. They might try to keep the game longer by giving out $200 cash every time a player passes over the starting point, but the game still will end eventually. The way I see it, we have started a giant game of Monopoly since World War II. Everyone was having fun in the 50s 60s chasing the American dream. But now the game is nearing the end. We can make out the winners, the trillion-dollar companies like Amazon, Google, or Apple. But what about the losers? Within Monopoly, they get booted out of the game board, but in real life this translates to suffering, and an increase in crimes, overdose, and death. The mechanics of capitalism has made us in the 20th century, and is about to unmake us in the 21st century, as it continues towards its destined state. Section 3, the impact of the problem. Now that I have defined the fundamental issue, it's time to pin down why is such an equilibrium unacceptable to us. It is unacceptable simply because the resources are not being shared in an efficient manner. In economic terms, there is such a thing as the diminishing marginal utility of return, roughly meaning that the more we have of something, the less value we get from it. Imagine a primitive and simple economy of 10 farmers, where one single farmer has 10 plows, and the 9 other farmers do not have any. While plows are necessary to loosen the soil to make produce, a single farmer can only operate one plow at a time and have no use for the 9 leftover plows. The other 9 farmers, meanwhile, could really use the plow and would get much greater utility from it. In such an unevenly distributed economy, the total output would only be equal to that of the one single farmer. On the other hand, if the resources are distributed evenly with one plow per farmer, then we have achieved the maximum utility. This economy would outproduce the former by tenfold, as all 10 farmers are producing at capacity. Throughout the remainder of the article, I will use the term efficient to describe such an economy. So in the context of this article, whenever I mention efficient, efficiently, or efficiency, I am referring to this state of wealth distribution where the marginal utility of return is maximized for everyone. Likewise, when I mention the word sustainable, it means that the state is moving towards efficiency, not away from it. And that is just the economic aspect of it. The human aspect would be that the 9 farmers, if not given the plow, would not be able to earn a living and suffer. So there you have it, we have come down to the underlying issue. Every time we talk about the wealth disparity, we are essentially referring to the problem of misallocation of resources. It is very important to see the problem this way, as it will be the basis from which I will form my solution. Section 4, the 2 obstacles. The end goal is simple and straightforward. which is to get people to share their resources in an efficient manner. But this is not a new concept. In fact, communism was created for this, and of course it failed. What differs in my approach is the natural and organic way I go about to achieve it. My solution transcends from the adherence to any system, whether communism or capitalism. Nor does it rely on people to change their existing mindset in any regard. As an analogy, we do not need to tear down the whole house to fix the water leak. There is just a small hole to be filled. This hole, in the context of wealth inequality, is our inability to share resources efficiently. Something is preventing us from doing so, and we need to find out what that obstacle is, before knowing how to remove it. First, let's use our cave-dwelling ancestors of the hunter-gatherer society as example. We know that sharing resources with each other is part of their daily lives, whether it is for social interaction or group survival. Altruism is not just a byproduct of intelligence, but a survival trait or even a competitive advantage. Is it possible for us, in our society, to recreate conditions for such altruism? So instead of a forceful resource allocation, as is the case with communism, let's figure out what truly induces people to naturally share resources. If a hunter catches an animal, he would share it with the rest of the tribe. The women would have their share of food, and they in turn provide him with plant-based nutrients or other services. Even the other hunters who came back empty-handed would still be given their share, because he knows that he may not catch anything the next time and would have to rely on them instead. We can see that sharing is clearly beneficial to the giver, and thus comes the motivation. To contrast with the present day, imagine that you are a billionaire who is trying to do good. Would you share your wealth with the millions of disenfranchised and poor fellows? You may think that you would. But when it comes to the execution, you run into the questions of how and why. First, how would you share your wealth? A practical issue is that you would have no idea where the real needy and deserving people are. It is easy to help if you personally know the struggling person and see that he is a good human being who genuinely needs a hand. But when you must filter through the population by the millions, the task to making sure that the money goes to the deserving ones is impossible. You may argue that the billionaires can just donate to charities. But the problem persists as the charities themselves won't have the capability to manage all that money. Remember, we are not talking about some generosity donation here. We are talking about an unprecedented amount of wealth transfer required to correct the wealth gap we have right now. The second is the question of why. Why would you share your wealth? What is in it for you? By giving the poor people the resource to reach their potential, you certainly make the society a better place. But this comes at the cost of your own fortune. Certainly, the ones you help will be grateful, and help you out if you happen to be in the same situation in the future. But if you are truly worried about your financial state, wouldn't you be better off not giving out your wealth in the first place? What about the goodwill generated by the recognition of being so generous? As the wealthy ones know, goodwill can be an asset to build one's image, which then open more economic opportunities. But goodwill itself is unpredictable. There is no telling of how much you will be getting, and how much is it really worth. One false accusation or tweet can easily destroy one's image. Also, goodwill does not escape the previously mentioned notion of diminishing marginal utility of return, so an overflow of it is not useful anyway. Now I must touch upon the argument that people can simply be generous out of compassion, without expecting anything in return. I agree, as this is my belief and observation as well. I have been following the Popular Humans of New York page on Facebook, and not long ago, it was featuring a lady named Tankwar A, telling her personal story of being a burlesque dancer in 70s New York, and how she has since fallen on hard time. There was a GoFundMe campaign set up to help her out, and people donated over $2 million in a week. So yes, people are definitely willing to help out when given the chance. But once again, pure altruism cannot be relied upon for the scale of sharing required to fix the issue. With Tankwar A, we are talking about tens of thousands of people donating what is chump change to them. All of this just to help one person. To induce the magnitude required, there must be real benefit to the donor as well. This does not make them selfish, or their intention impure. In fact, it is a matter of practical sustainability. If one keeps giving but receives nothing in return, one will eventually lose out. Our society has evolved so that no one is self-sufficient on his own. One provides to the group, and receives something back from the group. If either act is missing in the exchange, the group will be inefficient and unsustainable. I digressed a little, but all to showcase my original point on the questions of how and why to share wealth. That it is difficult to reach out to those truly in need, and there is not enough individual incentive to do so. Why does our hunter-gatherer ancestors not have this problem? Because they live in smaller and isolated groups. The close proximity between their members provides the high level of interaction required for proper resource distribution. First, they are not confronted with the issue of not knowing who to help. Because they are constantly communicating with each other, they are always aware of how important each one is to the tribe, and what kind of assistance they need or can provide. Secondly, there is great incentive to help. Being in a small group, any action performed by its members would have an immediate impact. As such, one must behave well for the sake of his tribe and himself. For example, if a member is a great contributor who always brings in food for everyone, he may gain prominence in mating choices, or decision-making. If a member is more of a freeloader, he may not enjoy the full protection or care if injured. As I wrote above, our society, being big and disjointed as it is, do not give people such an incentive to share for the greater benefit. This is very dangerous because when everyone is acting greedy and selfish, everyone is protected from being blamed as the bad guy. Without accountability, such collective behavior spread across the population and compounds to the modern day's decline. Section 5. The missing link. So what do we do? Our society cannot simply go back to the hunter-gatherer way of life, because we would have to forego technologies. You see, technologies were created to help increase production. Such an increase in production led to a surge of population, which then formed the modern society facing the current problem in the first place. We are looking at a catch-22 situation here. Let's use a reductionist approach to summarize the situation. In a hunter-gatherer society, we have little technology, which keeps production low, but wealth disparity is also low. But today, we have more technology, which increases production, but wealth disparity is high. We can see that an increase in production does not mean that wealth is automatically distributed efficiently. Could it be that another factor we haven't accounted for is responsible for wealth distribution? Let's think about the required factors to bring wealth to someone. First, you produce the good, then you deliver it. We have the technology to make wealth, but do we have the technology to deliver? It seems so too. We have massive logistic capabilities to deliver physical goods anywhere in North America within one day, like Amazon. We also have the web technology to transfer money to anyone instantly. Then, why are we still seeing increasing wealth disparity? I think there is a third factor that we either ignored or took for granted. I did allude to this before, and it is the ability to interact and communicate. This is important as it tells us where to distribute the wealth. You want to distribute it to those who can make the best use of it. So the equation for wealth transfer should really have three components. First, to accumulate wealth, then to find out where are they needed, and finally we can proceed to distribution. Each of the steps are affected by its own technological development. We have nailed the technology for the first and last part, namely for production and logistic, but do not have the necessary technology for the middle part of communication. This is equivalent of building a furniture, having the driver picking up the furniture, but have no delivery address. Because an ingredient is missing, the final outcome of distribution won't happen. The hunter-gatherers were able to make do without communication technology because their production and logistic technologies were just as underdeveloped. In other words, the ability to efficiently distribute resources is not about how developed any of the technologies are, but about the balance between them. A broken balance is what led to the situation today. Let me demonstrate again using a simplified version of modern economy below. Imagine an economy with 10 watermelon farms who are isolated enough so they cannot communicate with each other. They produce 1 watermelon daily, and are all connected by the common vendor who buys 10 watermelon in total. So every day, the vendor goes to one farm, buys 1 watermelon, and goes to the next until he has the 10 watermelon he needs to sell in the market. But one day, one farmer, let's call him Bob, invented a tool that allowed him to make 10 watermelons daily. The vendor soon realized that he can just buy all the watermelon from Bob, and stops visiting the other 9 farmers. As a result, Bob became very wealthy, and the other farmers, with no income, become desperate. Although simplified, this is the situation akin to ours, where we have the production technology and the logistic technology, but no proper communication technology. Now imagine if the farmers can't communicate to each other. What will happen if everyone realized, including Bob himself, that Bob is suddenly outproducing the other farmers, and thus taking their shares? There are a lot of suppositions we can make here, but undeniably, there is now pressure or incentive on Bob to share his wealth. The increased interactions gave the farmers new possibility to cooperate, and edging them to behave more communally to take advantage of the new opportunities. If Bob still refuses to share, he could face repercussion like those faced by a misbehaved member of a hunter-gatherer tribe. The other farmers could band together against him, or if another farmer makes an even better technology improvement, Bob could expect no reprieve. What I believe is likely to happen is that Bob, being now able to interact with the others, will share his wealth by prioritizing those he thinks can benefit him back. For example, he could choose those who are just as hardworking, so they can produce other products. Then instead of eating watermelons all day, the whole community of farmers could now eat and sell cucumbers, corns, and prosper together. Another cool way to look at it is via the game theory's prisoner's dilemma. Without going into details, it is basically a situation where 2 prisoners who are kept apart will both end up with a worse jail sentence, as they act logically for their own self-interest by ratting out each other. However, if they are locked together and allowed to communicate, they would logically reach an agreement to keep silent, and thus both receive a lesser sentence. This is what our current society feels like. Everyone is looking for his own interest at the expense of the greater common good. The whole idea of improving the communication technology is to break down the wall between us so we can work together towards a better outcome for all. Section 6. The Bad State. Just to be clear, by communication I am not talking about those endless back and forth that never escapes the confines of the internet, but meaningful interaction conducive to real-life changes. Here you may point out that we do have the technology to communicate. We have Facebook to keep in touch with friends, LinkedIn to find jobs, Tinder for relationships, Meetup to meet new people. So why am I saying that the communication technology is inadequate? While I agree that we have made such progress in communication technology, they do not match the progress we have made in production technology. Thus, we still have a technological imbalance here. In the most basic sense, the benefit we received as a society from the communication improvement cannot offset the net harm caused by the wealth unbalance as a result of the production improvement. Unless they can be brought to match up, our society will suffer. This was the point of the previous example with the 10 farmers. But the previous example works on a societal level in a simplistic way. In today's complex society, you wouldn't know who is taking earning power away from you. All you know is that suddenly your hard-learned skill is no longer valued. So how would an improvement in communication help when you don't even know who the so-called Bob is? The short answer is, you wouldn't need to know who Bob is to feel the improvement in your individual life. The long answer is, hold on to your hats, as I answer this in the current and next section, using a mathematical model based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These 2 sections are important as they lead directly to the final actionable solution. First, let's define the term utility, as how much benefit can someone get in one day, on the scale of Maslow's hierarchy. Say that a utility of 50 means that your basic need of food and shelter is satisfied. A utility of 80 means that your psychological needs of love, belonging and self-esteem are satisfied, on top of the previous basic needs. Finally, a utility of 100 means that all of your needs are satisfied, including the highest need for self-actualization. In a fully efficient society, people would obtain the utility of 100. This means that not only their basic needs are satisfied, they also have the time to create and invent new things, achieving their full potential for themselves and the society. Now imagine yourself as a taxi driver working 8 hours, spending 6 hours on social media, and the remaining 2 hours learning new skills to find a better job, for the total of 16 waking hours. You have the optimum 100 utility points required per day to be fully satisfied. Your daily basic needs of 50 utility points are satisfied by working at the return rate of 50 divided by 8, or 6.25 unit hour. Your social need of 30 points is fulfilled at the rate of 30 divided by 6, or 5 points per hours. And lastly, your self-actualization needs were fulfilled by your self-learning studies at 20 divided by 2, or 10 points per hour. Life is great and in perfect balance. Then suddenly some tech bro invented an app called Uber, allowing anyone with a car to make money giving out rides. Now your daily customers have dropped by half. So instead of getting the utility of 50, now you get the utility of 25. To make up for the remainder 25 points, you decide to take another job as a room attendant for 2 hours every day, at a hotel. When you go home, you'd still spend the 6 hours required on social media to satisfy your psychological needs. Then guess what? You no longer have time to work on your self-actualization as you have maxed out your 16 waking hours. So currently, that is 8 hours as a taxi driver, 2 hours as a hotel room attendant, 6 hours on social media. This means that you can no longer learn the skills necessary to find yourself a better job. Even worse, you are now at the mercy of the tech bros, and can only pray that they will not invent something called Airbnb to siphon all your revenue from your hotel job as well. This is what I meant when I mentioned the net harm caused by the wealth unbalance from a technological improvement in the production sector. You may say that, in a similar situation, you would ditch social media and spend the time studying instead. But such technicality is beside my point, which is that your capacity to satisfy some basic needs, whatever they are, can always be reduced so that you are stuck to the point of having no social mobility to escape. Additionally, this is a contrived example made to be quantifiable and simple, and I am aware that the demarcation of needs and means are blurred in real life. You can certainly use social media to earn a living to satisfy your basic needs, or for self-fulfillment, instead of just for psychological needs as it is supposed here. But we are not done with our example yet. We have quantified the problem, now we need to quantify the solution. Remember the previously calculated utility of return for social media of 5 per hours? What if the social media technology just got better, and improves the utility of return to 7.5 points per hour? As such, you would only need 4 hours to satisfy your psychological needs, and now freed up the 2 additional hours required to satisfy your self-actualization need. Your daily utility points are back to 100. And you are once again maximizing your potential. This example is just intended to show the mechanism by which a deficiency caused by wealth unbalance could in fact be offset by an improvement elsewhere. Since we cannot stop the progress of the production technologies, we must balance it with an improvement in the communication sector. Section 7. The Ideal State. I know it seems convenient to pump up the utility point of social media from 5 to 7.5. What does this even mean in real life? Let me answer this with another quantifiable example. First, recall the aforementioned platforms of Facebook, Meetup, LinkedIn, and Tinder. Notice how each of these accomplish a single purpose. Take LinkedIn for example. It is specialized for professionals to network and find job opportunities. This is a good business model, where one creates an app to fulfill a niche need, then expand horizontally across geographies for maximum users and maximum profit. This is how almost every social media app has done. From a humanistic view, this model is very inefficient. Programmers are used to code programs to do a sequence of one task at a time, relying on the light-speed execution of the computer to give appearance of efficiency and multitasking. Unfortunately, they assumed the same pattern to human interaction in their app design, by allowing one need to be satisfied at a time. Real humans cannot work at light speed, and usually have many needs to be satisfied at various degree. Currently, if you are simultaneously looking for a job, a relationship, and a fishing buddy using social apps, you would have to make 3 profiles, and devote effort on the 3 platforms of LinkedIn, Tinder, and Meetup. In today's fast-paced world of ever-shrinking attention span, this would not be a rewarding use of your time. When people socialize in real life, they use a more natural approach. They would get to know the person first, then decide which of his needs can be satisfied from her. There is no restriction on the purpose as it is the case with online platforms. You could be talking to someone who can satisfy all your needs, by becoming your boss, your romantic partner and fishing buddy at the same time. Here is a scenario. Say that you have the same 3 needs above, and your world has 20 people, 5 of which satisfy your employment need, another 5 your relationship need, and another 5 can be your fishing buddy, with no overlapping. Therefore, when you go to each of the respective sites, and talk to someone, there is 5 out of 20 chance of satisfying your need intended for that site. Your success rate for each interaction is 5/20, or 25%. Let's call this a utility rate of 25% per each interaction. Remember, you cannot cross over to satisfy a need that is not intended for the platform, meaning that if you meet someone who can satisfy your relationship need on LinkedIn, you wouldn't know because you are not even aware that she is looking for a relationship unless you meet her on Tinder instead. Now what about in real life? Well, the utility for your first interaction is up to 15/20, or 75%. As you are no longer bounded by the purpose of the site, all 15 people can be counted as able to satisfy one of your need. This is substantially higher than the previous 25%. Of course, this percentage shifts as more people you meet, and more needs are satisfied. But it is still higher than the online model, as now any interaction can potentially satisfy multiple needs, so you don't have to meet the same person again later. If you think about this, humans have followed this natural pattern of interaction for most of our history. In each medieval town, we had town squares, which are not restricted for a rigid, singular purpose, but for anything like markets, theaters, churches, or even rallies. People never needed a particular reason to visit. They can go just to keep in touch with the news and explore any potential opportunities that they might not even be aware of. And this is another downside of current social media. They assume that everyone knows exactly what they want, which is not the case in real life. Anyway, if you compare the utility of 75% to 25%, you could suppose that the real-life model is 3 times more efficient than the online model. Remember the previous notion of improving the utility return for the time spent on social media, from 5 to 7.5 points? This is what it means. Previously we had a utility of 5 per hour, and have to spend 6 hours to satisfy the 30 daily utility points needed. If we are 3 times as efficient as in this example, our utility point would be 15 per hour, and we would only need to spend 2 hours to satisfy the social needs, and free up time to devote to self-improvement. Section 8, A Beautiful World. The next question is, can we simulate this socialization framework in the online world? For a web developer with a keen interest in social media like myself, the answer is a resounding yes, and we can even do better. Now I'd like to ask that you keep your imagination open, as I describe the type of social media required for not only fixing the wealth gap issue, but help our modern society thrive sustainably. To start off with the basics, nothing prevents us from combining all the existing social media apps on a single platform. This alone would be an equivalent approximation of real-life social scene. Instead of limiting the purpose of its users, we can have a platform that is purpose agnostic. The app is only responsible to make its users visible to others, while the users themselves determine what they want to do with the app. You can indicate, for example, that you are looking for relationship, open for employment, and want to form a band at the same time. You would also describe your skills, showcase your work, or share ideas. How can someone find you based on your profile? This is where the magic happens. The other user would be able to narrow down the population using her own customizable criteria. For example, a band member can filter for someone with guitar skill between the age of 20 to 25 and see a whole map of people in her hometown matching those criteria. Then she would select your profile and check out the video you have uploaded shredding your guitar, and finally message you to join her band. The idea is to create an open world system where everyone and every post is visible. This is unprecedentedly empowering because you, as an individual, now have the power to interact with the community directly without prerequisite or limitation. Unlike Facebook or Twitter, you don't have to build your network by adding friends or get followers first. You can express anything you want, whether it is an article, artwork, project, etc., and get a reaction from the community. I would love to have such a platform so I can share this Prosperity Manifesto to the world, not just to my friends or followers. Currently, I don't even know how to publicize my article in our split social media landscape. The user can also customize or prioritize what they want to see. For example, they can choose to see only posts from authors matching a certain criterion, or about certain topics. The idea is to start with an open world system that connects everyone, then give the users the extra degree of freedom to choose the content according to their ever-changing preference. We could also go beyond humans' physical limitation to fully leverage the digital possibilities. Instead of messaging one person of interest at a time, why not just message all of them in one click, whether as a private chat or group chat? For example, you are organizing a big party and want to invite everyone who plays the online game of League of Legends, and are also ranked above Diamond. You would simply do a filter search for the list of all such users, and customize a message to be sent to all of them. For the techies who may be reading this may involve creating an API to the actual game, to grab information from your League of Legends profile, into your social network profile. It is important to see this as a foundation technology upon which endless possibilities can be exploited. If we add a feature to allow financial transactions between users, we then opens the door for business contracts to be drafted and fulfilled exclusively on the platform. Or we can allow local businesses to have profiles as well, which leads to a feature where users can leave ratings on such profiles. Of course, most of such functions do exist in real life on different platforms. But something magical happens when you mix them together, a sort of synergy that allows you to build on more features that were previously not possible. This synergy is what takes the social experience to the next level in terms of what you can do. Imagine you are in a city of millions, and you want to find people who are, say, bikers who are also fans of Sailor Moon. You may find only 10 people with such strange complexity, but at least you found your tribe. The curated social media landscape we have today simply do not allow us to express our humanity fully and freely. The Rolling Stones, arguably the biggest rock band in history, was only possible because Keith saw Mick on a bus, holding a Muddy Waters record back in 1961. Realizing a common interest, they started talking and ended up forming a band that still tours to this day. In our modern cities, where millions take transit, how many of such missed connections happen every day? Imagine how many amazing partnerships we can have had we captured those opportunities. Now you may ask, how does this help with the wealth gap again? Remember, my premise is that an increased interaction helps by letting the community know where the resources are located, and where are they needed. This was the missing ingredient for a better resource distribution. To get this ingredient, we really have to up our social interaction game. A better social media will certainly increase interaction, which will certainly render the society more transparent, which will certainly bind the fate of the community closer, which would certainly give reason to cooperate and share. Just for the sake of brainstorming a specific example, we could enable an urgent help needed status feature on each profile. Then we can filter on a map all those who requires assistance, whether it is to help cover the rent, food shortage, etc. Or we can allow users to proactively post feed tagged with help needed. Other users who see such posts can then help. To add more incentive, we can even credit the helpers by awarding badges on their profile, or have a public ranking for the biggest contributors. But besides the direct assistance above, most of the wealth transfer would be the result of the increased opportunities. Now we can encourage entrepreneurship by facilitating the connection between those who have ideas, to those who have the skills, to those who have the money. Resources will flow like never before, from those who have it, to those who can make the best of it. Section 9. The Path. The last question to ask is, how can we create such a massive platform? Just the idea of agglomerating all social network together seems unmanageable. Even Facebook and Google, with their advanced artificial intelligence and armies of moderators, can barely keep up with their own sites. Here is where I need to clarify something. The application I described above is not the end goal at all. It is not like we can wash our hands once the app is created. Addressing the wealth gap is a continuous process. Just like the technological advancement cannot be stopped to create wealth, the tools needed to know where to distribute them must keep up as well. This continuous process means that the described application is not the start either, so you do not have to worry about creating something so massive right off the bat. Instead, we can start small, and make its growth organic and gradual to become something big. So, what we really have to worry about is how to make the growth sustainable. In the tech industry, when we want to create a complex product, we would use an approach called the MVP approach, which does not stand for most valuable player, but for minimum viable product. This means to first create the most basic version of the product, with the minimum requirement to generate feedback or revenue, so we have the cash flow to introduce subsequent additions. These improvements are themselves prioritized according to their cash flow generating capacity. Such a process repeats until we have achieved all we wanted to accomplish in the final product. The scale of our application is even bigger than a singular product, but the principle is the same. The key to success to our application is what I call a feedback loop. This means that our success depends on our ability to receive the feedbacks and to act accordingly to the community we are serving. This way, the app and the community can prosper as one. I stress the importance of the ability to react to these feedbacks, because currently no social media can do so. Let me explain. Social media are very powerful in changing how we communicate fundamentally. But due to their success, the entire fabric of society changes, and this creates new demands for more social power. For example, Facebook was initially conceived for friends in real life to stay in touch with each other online. This in turn creates a massive outpouring of online users. Since everyone is now connected online, there is less real-life interaction, which in turn prompts the need to make friends online directly. This is the community feedback I was referring to, not some actual feedback submitted by an user. Because you have changed the way people lived for the better, new challenges arise. My problem with the existing social platforms is that none of them can meet these new challenges. The reason is simple. As they were inundated by their own initial success, they focused all their resources to scale out geographically to more users for maximum profit. There are no resources left to spend on the innovations required to tackle the new challenges of the changing society that they themselves shaped. This is a trap cycle, because now that their platform has become so big and worldwide, any major improvements are very demanding, if not impossible to implement due to their massive scale. Their model now becomes changes resistant. Therefore, major social media like Facebook nowadays spent most of their resources on tweaking data gathering methods, improved monitoring of news, etc. When the feedback involves a fundamental change in the base model, such as adding a feature to make new friends online, Facebook simply do not have the resources for it. It is not surprising that the big social media platforms don't really change or truly innovate even years after their initial inception. Section 10. The answer. For us to escape the vicious cycle that renders social media stale, we need to ensure that we are always in the position to act on the feedback provided by the community. By the above logic of larger platform being unable to adapt, we would need to scale down the reach of our platform. What would be the ideal size? Should we limit the targeted community to that of a country, a state, a city, or a neighborhood? Let me ask this question to you, as a member of the community. When you are looking for news that may most affect you directly, which news do you read? I would venture to say that it would be the city news. Personally, I care way more about the developments in my city than that of my province, state, or country. This is because what happens in a city affects me more due to myself being physically present. Cities, or urban agglomerations, are their own entities with natural delimitation. When I drive from Vancouver down to Seattle, I first leave Vancouver, drive for 2 hours into nothingness, then I arrive to Seattle. The nothingness between them serves as a boundary so that events happening in Seattle echoes within Seattle and do not travel to Vancouver. The other denominations such as states, provinces or even country, have an artificial boundary instead of a natural one. If you see a map of the United States or Canada at night, you can clearly see where the cities are by lights, but won't be able to tell where the boundaries between the states and provinces. Likewise, a neighborhood within a city also do not have a natural boundary, so anything that happens inside of it, whether rising housing prices or crime rates, can easily spread to the next neighborhood. As such, the feedback itself could be distorted or simply not reverberated back to the originating place, and we cannot see the real effect of our social media application. Due to a city's natural ability to provide the feedback loop, I would say it is the optimum size for a social network. This is where the social platform can make its impact, react to the feedbacks, and keeps on improving. This constant interaction loop between the application and the community makes it integral to the growth of the community itself. We often talk about a city's infrastructure in terms of public transportation and roads. But as the problems we are facing in the digital age are becoming more complex, we need to be accepting to the idea of having a digital infrastructure as well. This helps connect any missing link in our intertwined and complex world. As an usage example, city councils could use it to directly consult the city residents regarding ways to tackle common issues, or gauge the popularity of a potential new policy via polls, before introducing it. If we don't have such a digital infrastructure, we would not even have the required tool to solve these problems in the first place, whether it is about homelessness, rising prices, exploitation of resources, etc. But what is the point of having this platform for a single city, when the problem of wealth disparity is countrywide or worldwide? My reasoning here is simple. Once you demonstrate that you can do it in one city, the other cities can easily follow suit. One thing that works in our favor is that since the social media program will be written in code, we can and should open source the code to the public. This means that the programmers in the other cities can just take our code and deploy the same application in their cities right away, or even customize it according to their city's specification and needs. The result is that every city and its residents would see and control its own development process. Too long we have let our city's resources being sucked into Silicon Valley and Wall Street. We need something that is made by its citizens, for its citizens, because they are the real stakeholders, and thus can truly care. When the cities thrive again, maybe they can then extend to each other for intercity opportunities like connecting neurons, and by extension make the whole country prosper. This would be a more organic and sustainable way of development. Remember all the way to the beginning, when I said that I would present an actionable plan? This is it, a social media focused on the city. I won't go into the details of step-by-step or feature-by-feature implementation, although I do know where I want to start with myself. Again, things can change depending on the feedback by the community, so we may even end up with a different platform than what I described before. The general direction of building an online network that interacts and grows with the community is what matters, and remains unchanged. Section 11, Final Thoughts. Thank you for reading this far. We came a long way to answer the seemingly abstract and open-ended question on how to fix the wealth inequality. To sum up, the advent of production technology has increased our resources, but the interactive technology did not keep up, so we do not know where to direct our resources. The hunter-gatherers were able to know this because they spent most of their time socializing. Our society is even more complex, and yet we interact less. To correct this, we need to improve our interactive technology, so we can bridge the distance between us for proper communication, as demonstrated in the example of watermelon farmers. But such technology fundamentally works on an individual level, by providing the incentive to use it via rewards. On an individual level, these rewards are in the form of being able to better satisfy one's need, as per the example with Maslow's hierarchy of need. But in the context of wealth distribution, these rewards translate to promoting resource sharing in an efficient manner. Finally, I described what exactly such a technology should have, by logical reasoning, and narrowing down to the actionable plan of creating a city-based social media. On hindsight, I think my whole piece may be clearer if I reverse the logical flow, by starting on the individual motivation level, then work up to its societal impact of reducing wealth gap. In any case, the idea stays the same. A better social media tool for individuals leads to better resource sharing in the society. I think this solution should work because it relies on an understanding and respect of human nature. We are not forcing anything here. We are focused on changing the environment itself, by opening the door for communication and cooperation. If the environmental conditions themselves are not there, people would not share of their free will, and thus no change in policies or free money can fix the issue in the long term. This does not suffer from the issue of various socialist policy that benefits the universal poor, regardless of deserving or not. I probably should have highlighted this earlier. But notice how I never defined who deserves or does not deserve help. The social network simply opens the door for the possibility of helping, but let the people decide whom they want to share wealth with. The definition of who's deserving or not should never be universally defined, or it will inevitably lead to systematic loophole for exploitation. This responsibility is trusted on the shoulder of each person looking to share their wealth, as their interpretation varies, and may adapt according to the changing social-economic trend. Likewise, this transcends from any type of economic system. Communism produces crooks and thugs, while capitalism gives free rein for untold greed and appalling selfishness. By not defining the good and bad behaviors, we no longer protect them with an artificial construct, and subject them to the true laws of market. In a healthy social landscape, true good behavior will reward themselves, while the bad ones will be exposed and discouraged. This is way to sustainable development. Again, the wealth inequality can be fixed, and with not that much effort if you have the right tool. We just need to tweak capitalism with a touch of right technology. People tend to see technology as a bad thing nowadays, but it really is just a tool. As a developer who understands what can be accomplished with technology, I can tell you that much of its truly beneficial uses are being discarded as they are not monetizable. I may go as far as to say that the entire direction of technological advance today has been hijacked by the capitalistic need of profit-making. Wealth does not equal progress if it is held by the 1%. The problem was caused by technology, so it makes sense to rectify it with technology as well. Lastly, if you look at all the countries controlled by a handful of elites or dictators, you realize that they are insanely obsessed with monitoring and breaking down free interaction between its citizens, just to maintain their power and wealth. If the bad guys who are doing the oppression understand the threat of communication to the status quo, then why are us, the good guys, so oblivious to its intrinsic value in fighting it? Let's take some tangible action before it is too late. I don't know what a perfect society looks like, or what a potentially maximized society can achieve, but I believe it all starts with the creation of a city-based social media. I myself have been working towards this goal for the last 5 years. In fact, I got into coding precisely so I can create such a platform. Unfortunately, my process has been slow due to work and study commitments. If you liked what you read, and have the resources and knowledge to make this happen, please take this idea as your own and go for it. Otherwise, you can also help by sharing this Prosperity Manifesto. If you are interested in my particular endeavor, and being updated of my next milestone, please go to my site at www.endwealthgap.org/ and leave your name and email. Together, let's end our society's downward spiral.